Holy Spirit, for touching every one of our lives. We love you. You're in us, you're with us, you're upon us. Of all the people who gathered on the hill of Golgotha near the crosses, one of the women, Mary, she looked up. She clung to her sister-in-law for strength. All of the sobbing, the crying, the wailing had almost been wrenched out of her, and all that was left were tears rolling down her face. Her heart was broken. She looked through a haze. She looked up at her son, her beautiful son, Mary. She watched him on that cross. She remembered how in a manger, in a stable, she spread her knees and pushed forth this child. She remembered how he'd taken his first steps. She remembered how she'd raised him. She remembered how she'd watched him love his family, his sisters, his brothers. She remembered how he'd become popular, how he always had a good word, how he was always kind. She remembered how he'd got to love people. She remembered how the Holy Spirit had come upon him when he was a man, and how he'd gone everywhere healing people. People had come to him and crowds had begun to follow him. She remembered how at a certain point where they turned against him and suddenly there was hate. Now she looked up at him and through her brokenness, through her pain, she saw the wounds. She saw the blood that was oozing from those terrible stripes. She saw the crown of thorns on his head. She saw how he was in pain. She saw how he was bruised and battered. He lifted his head, and for a moment there was recognition in his eyes. And she looked into the eyes of this firstborn son that she loved so much. He looked at her and he said one word, "Woman." And the first thought that flashed through her mind was that he was protecting her, because if he'd said mother, perhaps the mob would have seen a connection between them and they would have torn her to pieces. And then suddenly, throughout history, there was this description of a gender, of a person who would stand in a place of danger, a person who would love their child, a person who would, even in the most desperate times, be one of those who would be there in their time of pain, a person who would raise a child, who would bear a child, who would care for the family, who would at times lead the spiritual life of the family. Woman. And through the ages there was this recognition of every woman since Eve. And even to today, the women, girls, teenagers, as they come of age, they have this incredible depth of care and love. He said, "Behold your son." And Mary looked over and there was John, and Mary Magdalene was down between them, sobbing with her head in her hands, and she looked past her sister-in-law and she looked in John's eyes, because her son from the cross had said, "Woman, behold your son." And then Jesus, out of his pain, said, as he looked at John, "Behold your mother." And there was this connection, and Mary realized that even in his last moments, this son that was hanging on the cross, this son that had gone through these incredible 33 years of her life and her understanding, was thinking of others, was thinking of her. And she realized that Jesus, her son, was connecting her with the one person who could look after her spiritual life, who could look after her needs, that she could live with and be protected and provided for. And suddenly, as she realized that this bleeding child of hers on the cross was considering her. She remembered the prophecy that Simeon had said, yes, a sword will pierce through your own soul also. And a sword pierced her heart, a sword of love. She remembered other prophecies. She remembered an angel speaking to her right at the beginning, and the angel had said, the Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. And she remembered the angel also saying, for with God nothing will be impossible. And she looked up at her son again, her firstborn son. And suddenly, as he looked at her, as there was this moment of recognition again, she looked into his eyes and she realized they'd meet again soon.